Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism, where we answer everything you want to know, don't want to know, and things you need to know about narcissism. Just a reminder, healing program coming up real soon. Please go to the video notes, hit that link, and we will start, instead of talking about the narcissist, talk about moving past it. Today we're going to talk about a little love bombing though, and we're going to talk about a very unique form of love bombing, which is love bombing with a self-righteous narcissist. Can you imagine how dull that is? But it's quite compelling. Let's take that on. Let's talk about love bombing with a self-righteous narcissist. Now in this series, we're talking about the different kinds of love bombing with the different narcissistic types. Not all love bombing looks the same, and it comes down to the kind of narcissist you're dealing with. It kind of helps to sit back and say, oh, that's why my love bombing was different than someone else's. Now, when I sat down and was crafting this series on love bombing and thought about self-righteous narcissistic love bombing, it kind of made me chuckle a little bit, because the self-righteous narcissists kind of seem like a group for whom love bombing from them might seem like a sort of dull buzzkill. But we have to remember that love bombing isn't just what is exciting. It is what is compelling to any given person. So just as a brief review, the self-righteous narcissists are those that are rigid, moralistic, judgmental, completely closed off to other perspectives, opinions, and ways of being and living. They preach about everything and can be rather stingy with money, time, love, and affection. They tend to be really dismissive, and they will dismiss and discard anyone they don't think is as upstanding as them or lives the way they do, and they will criticize lifestyles, choices, and be very unsupportive if bad things or bad luck happen to someone, and they'll blame it on that person's bad choices. The self-righteous narcissistic folks are interesting because they are so hyper-moral and so rigid. They often can appear to the world as though they're very upstanding people who live their lives in such a right way. I'm thinking about one self-righteous narcissist I knew quite socially, and he'd sneer at people for not eating the way he ate, or not living away from the city, and for not exercising every day, and for not going to bed at 8 p.m. and waking up at 4 a.m. He'd just sit there on his high horse and just be so judgmental of how other people raised their kids, even though his kids were a bit of a hot mess, and the way they would spend their time, and the places they'd go on vacation, and the places they'd go out to dinner. Sneer, sneer, sneer. And all of this was bundled up with a lack of empathy, a deep sense of entitlement, and a contemptuous sort of rejection he carried in everything he did. He only showed any kind of warmth with people who sort of shared his sort of cushy, privileged, well-ordered lifestyle. Now, the self-righteous narcissist is so focused on doing the right thing that to the untrained eye, they may seem like upright and upstanding people. They will pick people up at the airport, provided they were given sufficient notice. They will remember birthdays. They will send thank you cards. They will bring hostess gifts. They will follow through on things they would say they would do. All of that, frankly, is quite admirable. But accompanied by all that right behavior is coldness and rigidity and judgmentalness and an almost robotic, automated quality. You're thinking, what does love bombing look like with these folks? So let's talk about what would love bombing look like with a self-righteous narcissist. And if any of you are in a relationship, or were or are in a relationship with a self-righteous narcissist, drop it in the comments. Maybe share a little bit about your love bombing. Now, self-righteous narcissistic types often attract people who have been hurt or harmed by irresponsible people, or people who just weren't ethical in their behavior. They attract people who want someone who is a rule follower, or they seem very adult because they're not so shady or messy. For example, somebody who may have dated or been in a relationship with someone who cheated on them, or who broke other rules, or maybe someone who came from a family in which their parent or parents were financially irresponsible, or one of their parents was a cheater. Those folks may want someone who really seems to follow the straight and narrow, and might feel and want someone who feels loyal. And they may be put off by people who violate moral codes. Self-righteous narcissists are also really attractive to people that grew up in families that were chaotic and inconsistent. A person who may also be attracted to this self-righteous style may be somebody who feels restricted in that they can only date within a certain religious or cultural community, and may want to find someone who's very adherent to the religious or cultural codes and practices. So the strict loyalty and rule following and financial conservatism and behavioral conservatism and responsibility can actually be very attractive to people who may equate all of this with being taken care of in a very adult manner, being with someone who feels like it's an adult relationship. If someone has come out of a relationship characterized by betrayal, the experience of having someone say, I absolutely believe in sharing everything. Here's my phone. Here are my passwords. And I will always let you know what I'm doing or who I am seeing. Or if you meet someone who's a person who's really on point with being on time or something like that, it can feel like a gust of fresh air if you're coming out of a confusing space of lies, betrayal, and inconsistency. The moral rigidity of self-righteous narcissism can just feel like a correction and even safety after being betrayed. The love bombing isn't so much about what they're doing, but rather how they are being and how they live. As time goes on, and you might say, ooh, I love how honest this person is, you're going to see that those rigid moral rules will also be rigidly applied to you. And while you aren't doing anything wrong, you may not think much of a night out with some old friends, or you have an old friend from high school who's still on a social media feed because you're friends with their sister, or every so often wanting to spend some money on a fun weekend away. As the devalue and the discard phases start in a self-righteous narcissistic relationship, the self-righteous person's rigid but once comforting orderliness can start to feel punitive, infantilizing, and excessive. They may think that it's not acceptable that you want to spend a night out with old friends, or should not have anyone where there could be even a hint of impropriety on a social media feed. Or they may want to save and hoard money and never spend a cent of it on anything that resembles joy or fun. Self-righteous narcissists are very careful about following through, and they're very focused on doing the right thing, at least procedurally. That's also a part of the love bombing. They do the things that feel responsible. Like I said, pick you up at the airport, or drive you to a doctor's appointment, or ensure that some kind of financial thing gets done, or that your toilet gets fixed, or they might be even there to help your parents with something. They can feel like such good citizens and such responsible people, and that can really set up a lot of cognitive dissonance. Because you're thinking, isn't this what an adult relationship is supposed to be? Someone showing up and doing the right thing? So then you might find yourself justifying the lack of empathy and the coldness, or perhaps the lack of respect. But for a person who may have had past partners or even parents who would never follow through and do the things they would say they would do, somebody who follows through, that's really seductive. Love bombing may also be manifested as financial responsibility. Self-righteous narcissists, at least early on, just look really financially responsible. They started saving for retirement, starting with their first fast food job or babysitting job. They're often very careful to not carry lots of debt, but they're very aware of every cent. Again, that really looks so seductive and responsible at first blush. But over time, that fiscal responsibility may start to seem like something more sinister. Everything may start to feel like a transaction. You may find yourself going Dutch every time and splitting the check every time, which you may be okay with, but then maybe sometimes they will pick up the check and they will remind you later on repeatedly that they did so, kind of with an assumption that you owe them. They may become weird about moving in together down the line. They may set up elaborate spreadsheets for just splitting up rent and utilities. Self-righteous narcissists seem to focus on saving for some future day and may make the present quite uncomfortable, even when money could make a difference for health or well-being. And slowly the picture emerges that what seemed like really adult-like financial responsibility early on devolves into control, criticism, a mean-spirited cheapness, and record-keeping of everything from what they spent on your holiday gifts to refusal to spend any money on anything in the present that could be enjoyable. This isn't just good fiscal prudency. It's more of a mean-spirited miserliness, and they will often shame you if you suggest any kind of expenditure beyond the basics. But the financial responsibility in the beginning may be very seductive for people who are seeking security or had past relationships that felt very financially irresponsible. Red flags like judgment, inflexibility, even a snobbiness in these relationships often get written off as stress, being busy, or even an attempt to see the point of view of the narcissistic person. Well, maybe he is right. Maybe the reason he's not going to give money to his sister who's struggling for money is because she did shame the family and got divorced. Their financial inflexibility may initially be seen as frugality, but then it reveals itself as really being miserly and controlling. Their judgmentalness may initially be seen as a quirk, but when it starts coming out more and more, it feels very invalidating. Their my way or the highway stops feeling like self-assuredness or just knowing the way they want things, but rather it's experienced over time as entitlement and as being restrictive. So self-righteous love bombing is a very peculiar form of love bombing. Self-righteous narcissists can actually really feel like grown-ups because they have their money worked out and they seem hyper-responsible and seem to do the right thing. But their rigidity means that there's little empathy and flexibility when life may go sideways. Their entitlement comes out as their way is right and all other ways are wrong. Folks who are vulnerable to the self-righteous narcissist may be seeking a correction of old patterns. They may find comfort in someone who seems so assured in their sense of right and wrong, or they may conflate all of this sort of self-righteous judgment with maturity. Self-righteous love bombing may not be a last-minute trip to Paris or being wined or dined, but love bombing is love bombing. It involves being so seduced or taken in by the behaviors that feel comforting to us. And since all of us have different backstories, let's face it, different paths can love bomb us. Some people would say, oh, this self-righteous love bombing, that's not exciting. I want the picnics on the beach and the wild sex and the trips to Paris. But for people who really want that sense of comfort, responsibility, and really sort of feeling adult, self-righteous narcissists, just by dint of their behavior, may actually feel like a love bombing experience for people who are seeking that. Hope that makes sense, and thanks again.